Some non-native speakers say that English consonants and vowels are hard to pronounce and to distinguish. Why do they think so? Don't forget to subscribe to Lang Explorer to show your support. Some non-natives find it hard to pronounce well and distinguish certain consonants and vowels in English because they're absent in their own native language. Such phonemes sound identical to their ears, and they have to differentiate them by other means, for instance, by guessing or by referring to the context. Today we'll focus on those sounds which embarrasses those who speak English as a second language. This helps you understand better not only what they tell you when you talk with them, but also the hurdles they're facing with, how their mother tongues are influencing their pronunciation, and some unique features of the English phonology. Every language has its own phonetic structure, and English isn't an exception. Native speakers tend to take such a phonology for granted and sometimes wonder why some non-natives can't pronounce English as they do. So today we'll tell you why it's so difficult for some non-natives to hear and pronounce well. First of all, English has 8 pairs of unvoiced and voiced consonants, such as pack and back, coat and goat, to and do, price and prize, safe and save, cheap and jeep, sheep and vision, and think and this. But some languages have a different consonant system which distinguishes between unaspired and aspired ones, for instance Chinese. Its speakers distinguish between
ba
and
pa da
and
ta
and
ge
and
ke.
y, while English p and b may sound similar to them. While this concept of unaspired and aspired consonants are already known to native English speakers which pronounce differently between unaspired p, for instance speak, and the aspired p, for instance pack, some Chinese speakers may find it difficult to hear the difference between unvoiced and voiced consonants. Second, some consonants in English are absent in other languages. Especially th sound is very rare in other major foreign languages. Actually, only European Spanish, Arabic, and Greek use unvoiced and voiced th sound, although in Spanish the voiced one is just an allophone for d. That means Spanish speakers don't distinguish between these two consonants. Most people tend to pronounce it as T and D sounds, so they say think as tank and they as day, while Japanese speakers replace it with S and Z sounds, so thank and clothed are identical to sank and closed for them, respectively. Also, a number of major Asian languages as well as Spanish are devoid of V sound, which is usually replaced with B, so for them bass and vase are the same. Some of them lack F consonant too, such as Korean and Tagalog, which are typically replaced with P, so coffee and copy sound the same to them. Actually, the very name of the Philippines in Tagalog, written at passports, is
Pilipinas.
So you see that the replacement of F for P is very common there. Spanish has a consonant which are nowadays pronounced between Y and J, and its speakers tend to get confused between these consonants, on top of pronouncing Y as J and vice versa. So for them it's not easy to distinguish between yell and gel. Another common accent by non-natives is observed by those whose native language doesn't use H sound. This is true in Romance languages, especially in case of French and Italian, as this consonant disappeared a long time ago. So French speakers say he has a hat as
Yazaat.
Similar to Cockney in London. In French it was reintroduced for a while due to Germanic influence, but it didn't last long. In recent years, both languages have incorporated a huge amount of English words into their respective vocabulary, but H sound is still foreign to them and there are quite a few people who still don't pronounce it. Another consonant which is non-existent in several languages is Z sound. Such languages without Z include Spanish, Korean, Swedish, and other Scandinavian languages, including Finnish, which isn't a Germanic one, and sometimes they pronounce Z sounds as S, while Korean speakers tend to replace it with J sound. Such people can't distinguish, for instance, between bus and buzz, advice and advise, and price and prize, and sometimes they end up with pronouncing these words in an identical way. Also, some non-natives aren't aware of dark L in English, so they pronounce every L as light one. You should have heard somebody saying cell, ball, and well with light L, such as
Cell, bol,
and.
well.
It's rather due to their lack of knowledge on this sound than to their inability to pronounce it, but this is a common mistake by non-native speakers, although some languages do have dark L, such as Brazilian Portuguese and Polish. Japanese lacks not only the dark L but also light L, and they're usually replaced with R, so light and right, lot and rot and lime and rhyme sound identical to them. On top of that, Koreans find it hard to pronounce L or R if it comes at the beginning of a word, usually replaced with N sound or silent if such consonants are followed with I. Therefore, the same surname is pronounced as Li in Chinese and Yi in Korean. As far as R is concerned, this is a consonant which differs a lot from one language to another. Traditionally, it was a tap sound which can be still heard in many languages, such as Spanish, Arabic, and Russian, such as
Carro,
although this sound can be trilled in some cases, such as
carro.
But two different innovations took place. One is the uvular R observed in some European languages, and another one is the voiced alveolar approximant in English. The uvular R is particularly popular in French and German languages, and standard pronunciation in these languages already adopt this sound. For instance,
Rare,
although the traditional tapped R is still heard in some dialects. In case of English, the R became a retroflex one and was started to be the standard pronunciation, while in other languages this sound is typically only heard in dialects, and most non-natives have difficulty saying R correctly as this sound doesn't exist in their own consonant system. On top of that, Mandarin has its own R, which sounds like
zhi.
Another important case is that speakers of certain languages find it hard to pronounce specific consonants only when followed by some vowels. For instance, speakers of Japanese and Korean tend to change C as she, because such a combination of consonant S and vowel E doesn't exist in their native languages, so for them it's not easy to distinguish seat form sheet. Also, Brazilian Portuguese tends to pronounce TI and DI as chi and G, and some speakers can't pronounce words such as tip or deep. Now let's go to the vowels. English vowels are very complicated and far from the standard 5-consonant system in Latin and Spanish, and most non-native speakers found it hard to imitate such sounds. For such people it's quite hard to differentiate between fill and feel, hit and heat and sit and seat, and quite often they pronounce these pairs identically, making you wonder which word they're referring to. We'd like to tell you an interesting case of this sort. Nowadays Hyundai is a well-known multinational of Korean origin, but this corporation's name in Korean proper is
Hyundai,
very different than the one we're used to. This language has its own and unique vowels, and the transcription is done so the open O sound and open E1 were written with U and AI, respectively, because Koreans found the first sound similar to utter sound while they wanted to highlight the difference between E and AI as they chose the latter one as a sign for open E. English speakers, however, didn't follow Koreans' expectations, and nowadays we're too familiar with the sound which has nothing to do with how it's said in the original language. Then it's important to be reminded that not everybody is familiar with phonetic symbols. Most languages have their spelling system quite similar to the real pronunciation, and those who speak English as second language tend to pronounce on the basis of the spelling, under the influence of their respective native language. So some might pronounce love as love, but as boot, and hot as oat. Another point that we should take into account is the fact that transcription into another alphabet affects the way people pronounce. We already saw the case of Hyundai, but the opposite is true, whereby a number of English words are pronounced very differently in other languages. In case of Japanese, which has only 5 vowels, it's not easy to transcribe English words into their own alphabet called katakana, and hat and hut are written identically as
hatto.
So these words are homophone to the Japanese, at least when they hear such words when they speak in their native tongue, and such merge also happens when they speak or hear English. Also, we need to take into account that some languages prefer open syllables, in other words, such syllables ending with a vowel without being followed by a consonant. Japanese and Korean are typical examples of this sort, transcribing Christmas as
クリスマス
and
크리스마스,
respectively, with a few vowels added to they can pronounce more easily. Actually, this phenomenon can be observed also in the Pacific Ocean, where the very name of the country, called Kiribati, derived from the name Gilbert, even though the name changed a lot not only because of the open syllables, but also due to the fact that the local language lacked G and L sounds, which were substituted by K and R, respectively. Therefore, it's a good idea to study the phonology if you're finding it hard to understand those who speak English as their second language. Usually, their accent is heavily influenced by the sound system of the language they're native of, and understanding such features will help you understand them better. Quite often, they have a huge vocabulary in English, and it's merely their accent which prevents you from grasping what they're saying. Once you get used to their pronunciation, we're sure that your relationship with them will be substantially improved. So let's summarize what we've learned today. Every language has its own system of consonants and vowels. Some languages don't distinguish between voiced and unvoiced consonants, as we do in English. Some consonants in English don't exist in other languages, such as th, v, f, h, z, l, and r. The rf sound in English is very unique, while other languages have their own variants. Vowels in English are so complicated and hard to be distinguished for speakers of some languages, especially if their amount of vowels is limited. Transcriptions can be sometimes cheating, for instance, the case of Hyundai. People tend to pay more attention to the spelling than to phonetic symbols, therefore pronunciating erroneously some words. Some languages prefer open syllables, adding some vowels. It's a good idea to study the phonology of your friends' native languages. Then you can understand why they speak with such an accent, and your relationship with them will be improved as you understand it. Thank you for watching this video. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next one.